Hey guys, I just want to talk about my Continentals decks. My first deck is a monster deck. Now, just to be clear, we're working on this long before the monster list topped in Japan. But the big thing I want to make clear about monsters and what makes monsters good isn't strictly the monster card type. It's the fact that they are forwards that your opponent can't get to. In a similar vein to like old school Kadaj, but even harder. And obviously, other big thing that comes with that is that there is no board clear for them outside of Sin, but that's not exactly real. And now most monster decks will be Earth based, and that's because of Mirror and Zombie, and then also Animist, and then stuff like Chantoto obviously helps with that too. But I immediately, when I first approached building a monster deck, I knew I had to put water in it because the water monsters add a lot more of those forwards, like I mentioned. So I really only want monsters that are forwards, forward bodies that my opponent can't kill. Those are the monsters I care about, and so you get the most of those in water. Whereas Earth doesn't have really that many. Of course, the Zombie is incredibly good. So the bread and butter of Mirror and Zombie. So Mirror, this is the real Legend Mirror of the set. Unfortunately, the Lightning Legend is kind of cute, but it does the exact opposite of what you want in monsters. It kills your monsters for your opponents. So it actually helps them in the main thing that makes your deck good. It kind of takes that away. But obviously, the big thing with Mirror is that she can give you brick walls. So you use her effect on one of your monsters, zombie, blue, and whatever, then that can block infinitely for the entire turn. And then, if you've got another zombie, play a zombie, get a mirror back, play the mirror again. She digs for your monsters, she turns them into infinite blockers. And that's especially good with something like Tonberries. This is another reason water works so well with this. So Tonberry, your opponent can't even easily bait out the mirror. They can't even force you to use it necessarily because if you make a Tomberry unbreakable and then block something with it, it'll kill the thing and survive. That's also very funny against party attacks for the record. But all that's fairly straightforward monster stuff. So the other thing one big thing you get from water is Hippocampus. So Hippocampus is kind of like a board wipe, sort of, it rewards you for being able to play lots of things. And again, your opponent can't get to them, they can't wipe them. So you can just keep stacking more monsters on the field, keep upping the count for your Hippocampus. And it's so hitting 5k with it, AoE 5k in opponent's board, that's pretty easy. 7k is perfectly feasible, so you can kill off like Tituses and Glacielas or whatever, like stuff like that. That's not too difficult. And then even getting up to like 8k is feasible. Very occasionally 9k, but you've probably won by that point anyway. Now, another thing that often comes along with monster decks, because you've got the Earth base, you've got Zombie, which gets one cost back, you can play Leo, and Leo obviously will be a fairly decent size pretty easily, but that's not really why you play it. What you actually play it for is Wall. So Wall, as we all know, incredibly good card. If you can fit it into a deck, if you can afford casting it in your deck, then it's probably worth doing. So Leo works really well with Wall like that. But one thing that you get from Water is that it's actually quite feasible to hard cast Walls, like to have the backups in play that will let you cast Walls without needing Leo, without even going into like extra rainbow backups. Like you can still stay with an entire Earth Water backup line. And so, as you can see here, I've got Cosmos, I've got Tyro, and then Class 4th Moogle was the big one. So if you've got Class 4th Moogle and then any Earth, any Water backup, you only need one Rainbow backup along with that to have your Wall backups. And so Chantoto already is one thing that covers that. And then you can have Tyro as well, which is a good fourth one to play because it searches the wall. And then Cosmos. Now, the one main weakness of Cosmos usually would be that if you draw it later, it sucks because it's a light card that you can't do anything with. But in this deck, you've got Tomberry, right? You're probably going to need a card to discard to use Tomberry at some point anyway. And so you can just dish the Cosmos for that. Also, you've got Loporrit, which is very good at filtering out dead cards like that too, especially when you've got extra light cards. So another really good thing about monsters is Shinryu. Now, Shinryu is a massive buff to this kind of strategy because you get all the benefits of Shinryu being cheaper, and your opponent gets none of them, right? So if your opponent's playing, so there's basically two major advantages. One, your Shinryu is always going to be the one that's cheaper, and your opponent's is never going to be cheaper. It's even feasible in this deck sometimes. If you happen to have, Leo Wall and then say Mirror on the field, you just sack the Mirror if your opponent's playing Shinryu, and then you still won't have three forwards for them. They're never going to be able to cast a Shinryu cheaper, whereas they pretty much have to try and put more forwards on the field to actually get through to you and kill you. So they are going to have to turn your Shinryu on at some point. So that's incredibly good. Now, with the Hippocampus, you've got a lot of ways to consolidate it as well. So Wall is one way, and so the good thing about Leo, Wall, and Shinryu is they are all big enough to survive your own Hecaton share. So Hecaton, similar to Chantoto in like a monster deck, is effectively a one-sided board clear. Now AK is sometimes not enough, but again, you can consolidate with Hippocampus. And there are quite a lot of decks that do want to put a lot of forwards out early. They actually will generally be 8k or less. So Hecaton actually works incredibly well here as well, as you'd expect. Now, besides casting Wall, Leo doesn't come up that often, and I would almost never cast Leo naked. Like, I don't just play him as like a 1-cost guy, unless maybe if I'm trying to put a blocker for Sedaine or something like that. But because there is, most of your opponent's forward removal is dead usually against this deck, that, if you just play a Leo on the field, then they'll probably just have a way to kill it. Most likely. Whereas if they use something like that on a Wall, they're not actually getting any efficiency because Wall is more than free for you. And Shinryu will usually have gotten you, again, it might probably effectively 0 cost, or it might have, cleared their board already, you don't care anymore. Whereas Leo doesn't actually do anything if you haven't used it to cast a Wall. So yeah, unless you desperately need the blocker, I don't usually cast the Leo for no reason. As for the monsters that are in here, so obvious ones, so your Blue Worm, Zombie, and Tomberry are like insane. Like, you can just play as many of those in the field over the course of the game. Just sit in there. Do not even like swing with them. So I see a lot of people sometimes in their monster decks or the decks with these kind of cards like Blue Worm and stuff, they kind of like poke with them. Maybe they clear their opponent's board one time or whatever, and they're not going to kill them, but then like, poke for a bunch of damage. Then their monsters die. And like, you don't want to do that. There's no reason to do that, because if your monster's going to die at the end of your turn, like, it's only ever going to deal 1 damage. It doesn't matter when you do that damage, it's only ever going to deal the 1 damage. So you may as well wait until the end of the game, until you actually win the game, because there's no reason to do damage to them unless you're doing 7 damage. So yeah, don't transform your Blue Worms and Zombies and stuff if they're just going to die if they're going to die, unless you're actually killing your opponent. And obviously they're usually the last ones to transform as well for that reason. So we've got Ahriman and Phoenix. So Ahriman and Phoenix are kind of the removal ones. Now, Ahriman is very good at hitting certain things that you can't get to otherwise. A big one is X-Death, the legend X-Death, and Mirror is another one. Whereas Phoenix is more generic. You can obviously hit multi, so stuff like Sid Hayes, other random multi-element forwards, you target with that. And also Phoenix is actually a 9k. That's the biggest monster you have. It doesn't die end of turn either. So that's actually a very good just a monster to have in play anyway. And usually the 9k you can pay off its cost to enter in the first place. Melusine is the funniest. So Melusine is a very, very funny card, primarily for Animist. So Animist has an action ability, pay 1 tap, sack, search a monster of 2 or less from your deck, play it on the field. And you can do this during your opponent's turn. So when it comes to Melusine, there's actually a lot of weird, funny sort of uses or interactions you can do with that. I mean, the most obvious one is your opponent attacks you with something, you pull out Melusine with Animist, take control of their other forward and block their forward with it. And so one way or the other, one of their forwards probably die, depending which one's bigger. That's like basic, but then you can do actually even cuter stuff than that. So you can, in their turn, they play Rydia, you can take it in response to the counters getting added, you get it, and then you can ping it off with your Wall before it goes back to them at the end of turn, because it can take damage from your summons abilities. Even funnier, if you manage to take their Rydia with Melusine during your turn, if it has 6 counters, you can use those 6 counters to cast your Hecaton for free, which will also kill their Rydia, because again, it can take damage from your summons abilities. So there's like a million other things, but yeah, it's just a very funny. It's very, very hard if for some reason you don't have your your mirror kind of brick wall happening, or maybe you're worried they have a way through it. Then having an Animist up is a very good. It's very good insurance against almost any way they could try and cheese you, especially unblockable stuff like Stola. So yeah, that's just an incredibly good option to have. And this has helped, obviously, having a one of, oh yeah, well, you just draw it now, you can't do that anymore. Well, that's where Loporrit comes in, right? So Loporrit, incredibly good common, water backup, so strong. The fact that, one, it lets you obviously just filter your hand just early on. You can, dig for the right cards you want early and put the other ones you want later back in your deck. It gets rid of, Shinryus against decks that they're not going to be very useful against. But yeah, the big one is you can put Melusine back in the deck if you draw it, so then it's still available for Animist. And you can even do that once Loporrit's already on the field. If you need, in a pinch, you need to get that Melusine in their turn on the bottom of your deck, you can sack the Loporrit, do its effect to do it that way. So that's very, very cute and useful stuff you can do around that. So yeah, talking about Animist, yeah, insane backup. It would still be very good without the damage 3 ability. So the damage 3 is more like a cherry on top, like a bonus if it comes up. But don't sit around waiting for it if you can't see that it's literally about to happen like next turn or whatever. So, I've already covered most of the use cases. I should talk about the other random monsters. So Echidna, Tross, Antlion, and Thunderdrake. So these are all my last few monster slots that are all, contributing to various random niche purposes. So Echidna can add back Hecaton on demand. So, it basically means Animist can kind of search Hecaton if you've already seen one, which may occasionally come up. But the other big thing about Echidna is that it's an 8k blocker that you can pull out with Animist. That's incredibly good against Sedaine because it can block him and kill him without dying. It's also just decent in general. There's, a few certain situations where your opponent's attacking with something that's weak or equal to AK, and you can use Animus to block it and actually trade with it or beat it in battle. But yeah, generally it's more for getting a Hecaton back. Now Thunder Drake is just a nice option, especially to kill stuff like Rydia. And then Tross and Antlion are just the other the next on color sort of forward transformy monsters that you have access to. Hades sucks, so I had Hades for a bit and he's just terrible. Whereas Tross is actually decent. If it does turn on, if you get to 3 damage, then yeah, it can give you cards, draw a card, or you can use it to get things off the field that are blocking certain things. And so this actually came out for me in a match against Soiree, where my Tross allowed me to get the Madame Edel off the field so I could kill their forwards with stuff like Shinryu or potentially Hecaton. And then Antlion again, it's just a forward really. Like the effect basically never comes up. It's pretty much just another forward monster. Not like hyper important or anything like that. It's not like a hell good card. It's just another forward monster. So the next one down. As for the rest of the backups, I mean, it's fairly straightforward. I've already explained, Glasswall, Tyro, Cosmos. Shantoto, obviously very good. And it is actually quite feasible to just play it, it doesn't even have to get heaps of value or anything like that. Again, you can just play it as your 4th backup. It means you probably won't die next turn. And if that gives you wall backups, then that's especially useful because now, you can just hardcast walls for the rest of the game. So don't worry about sitting there trying to get full value or I've got to wipe a bunch of forwards. You can use it as just a generic backup, assuming you can take at least 1 or 2 forwards with you, just to sort of pay it off a bit. Minor is kind of like Loporin, a bit worse because it can whiff, but it is good at digging for, stuff like Cosmos or more Animists. It's good for just color fixing, getting if you've only got Earth backup so far, try and find a water backup. Maybe try and find Shantoto if you want that. It's just the next best kind of Earth backup that doesn't clash, name clash with itself. And then, so Yagrosh and Epitaph are kind of like the flexible spots. So Yagrosh is just a great card against Icewind, Ice Lightning in particular. Ice in general, obviously, but yeah, those are the 2 that tend to show up. And then Epitaph is just a nice 1-cost backup that, guarantees you'll see your mirror, or gives you more chance of seeing mirror. So you have it available for zombies, whatever. Just decent. But yeah, those you can actually play, various other backups if you want another backup for a specific reason. I think that's basically all of the stuff I need to talk about for the deck. In terms of weaknesses, so I don't feel threatened by anything pretty much. There is basically there's one card that's a threat to this deck, and then there's a couple decks that can beat it, depending on how they draw early and all that kind of stuff. So the big weakness of this deck, the main card that can beat it, could cause trouble for it, is X-Death. So that's the Lightning legend that gets cheaper if you have Delusory Warlock or whatever. When it enters, removes all the characters, and at the end of each of their turns, you remove a character for the game. And so that's really good against decks. Why? Because it's 10k, so you can't kill it you can't kill it naked with Hecaton, you can't kill it naked with Phoenix. And obviously it's now you can't just sit around doing nothing forever and just eventually win, right? Because every turn you're losing a character off your field. And you'd think that this would be an okay deck against it because, you've got these blue worms and stuff that you can just throw under that and they're not that inefficient to lose. But unfortunately, you actually do need those to, eventually kill your opponent. And so they actually will bleed you out if they sit there behind an X-Death and you can't kill it. So that card is the only thing I'm really ever concerned about, I guess. Other than that, the other decks that can beat it is Icewind, if it draws a good amount of Locks and Alexanders. Also, usually they need a Chocobo backing them, so obviously Icewind is quite weak to board clears, so Hecaton and Shantoto and Shinryu will cause trouble for Icewind. But if they've got Chocobo backing them up, then they can, pull back, say, Sid Hayes or maybe Locke or whoever, and then do their stuff again next turn. So that deck can win, very fairly, that's fair enough. And then the other one is Fire Lightning Scion, so that's the kind of deck that can be anything, obviously, if it, it can kill you on turn 1 or 2. Also, even if it manages to not quite kill you, but deal, say, 6 damage to you very early, then the threat of the unblockable Ishtola means that you basically have to have Animist and Animist up with Melusin in deck for the rest of the game, or they can just randomly kill you with an Ishtola. Also, if they're playing stuff like the your Tsuyu or the Ninja backup that makes your thing unblockable, they can also get through Mirror's protection too. One thing to watch out for, not that this is really a threat to the deck, but just a certain thing you need to watch out for. There's a couple of things that can get through Mirror's sort of brick wall stuff, and one of them is Cooch Lane. So Mirror actually grants the character the ability, so if they turn off its abilities, then it actually can die. It's just something to watch out for. Now, cards that I've deliberately avoided in this deck, one is the Behemoth, the 1-cost Earth forward Behemoth. I said I'm playing Antler and stuff like that as the next forward monster. So Behemoth obviously is a forward monster, but paying 1 to animate it fucking sucks. It's awful. And casting the Behemoth in the first place also sucks. So, look, it's okay. If you want to play it, you can. And there's a couple of things that it's okay against with the blocking attacking thing, but yeah, having to pay to animate your forward is pretty bad. I don't advise it. And then the other things that I've deliberately not put in is basically any of the non-forward monsters. Cleone sucks. I don't really think that card is worth playing, even if you have 0 summons. And then there's a bunch of other random ones like Gigas, FFCC, which is similar effect to Behemoth when it enters, then also can deal 8k to something for paying much CP to sack it. Again, I'm not playing monsters for the monster card tag. I'm playing monsters to have bodies that my opponent can't get to. So I should mention also obviously Lightning has a lot of ways to kill monsters, but all of them are basically only single target kill monsters, right? And you have so many monsters that unless they can constantly recur them with something like Man in Black, that still won't be enough on its own. And that's where something like X-Death does come in there. Then suddenly now that is a threat. X-Death, especially with monster destruction backing it, that is quite a threat. But yeah, just in general, don't be too scared against Lightning in general, just because they might have some Ramus or Ramus basically. Yeah, that's not too bad. There are some potential changes, naturally, as there always is. So one thing I did have for a little bit was a second Ahriman, and that's perfectly reasonable. Again, it kills X-Death, it can kill Rydia. There's, a few things it outs that it's just useful for, and, sometimes you've drawn it early and discarded it, which I generally don't advise, but can come up. Or, you just can't find it. Again, there's only one of it in the deck, so it's perfectly reasonable you just don't see it. Deathlord is something that, this is really stupid. I don't know how I did this, but I had in my head that it was forwards only. And I even said to someone, I was like, I considered playing Deathlord. If it was characters, I played in a heartbeat because I can only get forwards. I don't know if I want to. And then someone was like, what do you mean? And then I read it, and it actually is characters, so it can get back monsters, which is actually pretty cool. So that's actually a decent card. It also can turn on something like Tross on demand, and then even if you've got that ability to give yourself a damage on demand, then maybe you could even go into stuff like Spectral Keeper, Tomos, Spybloss, Jin, some of the other damage 3 transforming guys, because they're pretty good. But I never got around to start trying it. Epitaph is still very nice, so I didn't feel too much pressure. Then obviously one thing I never considered, which is obviously in the Japan list, is something like Go-Go. So Go-Go, it's very funny with Hippocampus. Maybe there's a couple of things you can do with maybe Wall or whatever, but yeah, I believe the main purpose for it is Hippocampus. And that's cute, that's cool. But I do think I get the feeling that, one, it's off color as well, but the main thing there is, I think if you've got the kind of board where you've got a Hippocampus in play, you've got that many forwards that double Hippocampus will clear their board and stuff, then you're probably, and you've got the ability to cast the Go-Go with the ICP or whatever, I think you probably already won the game anyway. There's not many games where, you having the resources to do that where you wouldn't have already won anyway. Even if you don't have the extra Hippocampus effect to trigger off the Go-Go, you're probably still just in such a good position that you'll eventually win the game anyway. That is monsters though. So I probably should have done these in 2 separate videos, but I'll just cover them both in the one video anyway. So I'll start on my deck B now, which is Summoners. And this deck is very close to my heart because I haven't seen anyone play Rydia like this before. And by that I mean, in this deck, she is only ever 2 counters, never 4. Now, never trying to get to 4 counters. There's in fact no way to get her to 4 counters in this deck. It is only 2 counters. So the big thing, when I was playing, so Rydia was one of the first things I was trying at the start of the set, naturally, because I saw the Cecil, I was like, that's very good for Rydia. And so in testing Rydia at the start, especially once people were playing, ways to kill her, especially stuff like Ixion, Ramu's, other various things, I learned the 2 main things that made this deck, that led to this deck at least, so the 2 main things about the regular, I guess, or more normal Rydia decks, was that Rydia dying is not the problem in itself. It's the fact that, because, she's easy enough to recur, you've got Kusits and all that. The main problem is that you also need a second, once to replay her, you also need a second category 4 character to play with her as well to get her back to 4 counters. So in the regular kind of Rydia decks, Rydia at 2 counters is not that great, whereas the 4 counters that's where she's good and what you want her at. And so, Cecil obviously did provide a great option to do that, but it did also present some paradoxes that, I don't really need to go into, the idea of having to have them in your deck. Again, being able to just, have one Rydia die, recur it, play it again, that's perfectly reasonable. Having Rydia die, having to recur, and then also play another category 4 on top of that, again, that's like a lot more to ask for. Also against bounce, for example, like bouncing a Rydia from 4 counters is much more, when you want it to be 4 counters, is much harsher than just bouncing a 2 counter Rydia, just replaying the Rydia. So there was that. And then the other thing is that Riku is a really, really high ceiling card. So that was a card that that was one of the first things I was playing around with at the start of the set. And you can see that in Sam Prime, I played it in his deck and placed very well at the event that he was playing at, from what I remember. But anyway, Riku, very high ceiling, very cool card. But unfortunately, it was not quite reliable enough without consistent haste when I was playing it before. But fortunately, the answer to both of these questions is, as I've said and alluded to, is the same thing. The most important summon is Kusith anyway, right? Which is actually only a 2-cost summon anyway. So all the 2-cost haste summons are 2-cost as well. So we've got Belias and Ramu. So why not just play Rydia with 2 counters the whole game? Why even bother trying to get it to 4 counters? Just play the 2 counter Rydia. I can still do my Riku stuff. I can in fact do it even more reliably because I've got all the ways to give out haste. I can still do Kusith, so I've still got the important summon that lets you get all your things back over and over again. Of course, you lose the ability to cast Amaterasu, which is the main loss. You also lose the ability to cast free Mist Dragon. And those are both protection cards. But the thing is, the protection isn't strictly necessary if instead you can just have your guys die and then get them back and then play them again, right? Because that's kind of the same thing. Like, whether you spend resources to protect your thing or it dies and you spend resources to put it back into play, the end result's still the same. So on top of that, there actually is still a protection card that you can cast it too, which is Titan. And it's actually decent, legitimately. It even has uses that the other 2 don't cover. Not a lot. Obviously, they cover a lot more. But in particular, it does cover Shinryu Special, which is one of the things that is a threat to Rydia. Typically, if you've got your Rydia, especially when you're trying to get to 4 counters, you usually definitely have at least 2 falls on the field. And then, there's usually a third if something like Une or whatever else, maybe a Garnet, something. Shinryu is quite good against Rydia decks for that reason. And Amaterasu is average against it. Mist Dragon doesn't stop it, but Titan does quite a good job of stopping it. So that's that there's basically having Rydia at 2 counters isn't actually the biggest loss in the world. Like you lose Amaterasu, sure, but other than that, it's not really a big deal. And in fact, there's plenty you can do with Rydia at 2 counters, and that's where something like Yuna comes in. So now one of the big things we lost when Rydia went in this set is Sildra, obviously. Sildra was a huge part of, a very, very strong card. One of the big things, yes, it was huge for consistency, and it let you kind of cheat deck building with your backups and all that. But the bigger thing in Rydia in particular is that it was a value engine, as in a way to generate CP off your Rydia, even during your own turn neutrally. And so losing that meant that, now Rydia, even a Rydia 4 counter Rydia, doesn't really have it's not really a threat per se. Like, it's more of a support, right? The ability to be able to cast Amaterasu and stuff like that does help you do whatever else you want to do. But by herself, she's actually not really doing, she's not doing something hyper-threatening herself if you don't have the ability to cast Sildra. And my original, attempt to solve that was Mind Flayer, and that was okay. But again, very sort of unreliable, I guess we'll say. And obviously Mind Flayer is not a easy card to cast without Rydia. Anyway, but now something like Yuna, though, Yuna is a way to generate CP off your Rydia, right? If you're free casting summons of Rydia, but then now each of those is drawing you a card, now you do have a way to actually convert your Rydia into a threat, I guess. I mean, technically it's Yuna doing it, but she has protection for herself as well. And she's actually okay. She doesn't need the Rydia either. Yes, it's much better with it, but even outside of not having a Rydia, Yuna is decent. Now, Riku as well, as I've already mentioned, incredibly high ceiling. Now you can give her haste pretty easily. Obviously the main thing, like obviously killing and drawing a card, like kill a guy, draw a card, very, very strong. But the one thing in particular that I learned to appreciate more and more, especially as the format goes on, as the games went on, and the more I used it, is that it lets you dodge EX. And that, for me, that's huge. I think EX is one of the main ways that someone can win a game without doing anything. Like, they can win a game for nothing. Like, they just, for a source of variance that means my decisions don't matter if my opponent hits the right EXs at the right times, right? So having Riku be able to ignore that and, in fact, guarantee that it doesn't happen, that is huge. And that, again, that's one of the reasons I really love both of these decks as my decks, was that neither of them cares about EX. So monsters, obviously, they never have to attack until it's game. In this deck, you've got Riku, who the only times you really attack until you've basically won the game is with Riku, and you can ignore EXs that way. But obviously, because the forward that you top deck then becomes their damage. And so, yeah, once you've resolved it once, it's still on the field as a threat. And this is very relevant now when, 2 of the 3 summoners are threats themselves. And so there's kind of like most fields in this deck have more than one threat on them, and that's actually really annoying for your opponent to have to figure out which is the main threat they have to deal with, and then they still have to leave the other one there. I'll talk about that more in a second. Obviously, I don't need to talk about Rydia. I've already explained everything. All I want to say about Rydia here is that you basically don't cast her unless you intend to use her effect, or if it's like the only play you have to not end on more than 5 cards. Yuna, I was explaining before, it gives you a CP engine that you can leverage with Rydia. It's fairly sticky due to its protection. The big thing is that it's special, or one main big thing about it is that special is actually really, really good, especially when it comes to Kusith. So you can actually convert your Kusith into a removal spell, basically. So that's a 2-cost removal summon, which obviously is free castable with Rydia. That's really good. So Yuna, all the parts of Yuna are very relevant and useful in this deck. She's a summoner, of course. Garnet, obviously good. I don't need to explain that. Being the multi-element actually comes up a lot with Garnet in this deck because, the CP, again, when we've got this many off-color cards, maybe sometimes CP can get in the way. I accept that. So Garnet's really good at helping with that, CP flexibility, and the redundancy with Echo too. But what is also worth mentioning is that while Garnet is like kind of the one vanilla in this deck that you have on the field, the fact that it's a summoner makes that really relevant. And it's effectively perpetual because you can just add back a Kusith with the Garnet, and then if you still need a summoner, your Garnet dies, whatever, you Kusith back Garnet, play the Garnet again, get the summoner. Like, you're always going to have a summoner available pretty much. Now, BFA. Sick card, love it. Similar to Yuna, it is a 0-cost removal spell, basically. This one doesn't require Rydia, although often she'll be there because she's one of the summoners. And it's just very easy to turn him on. As I mentioned, Garnet will usually sit around. Then you just need either Yuna or Rydia. Both of them have protection, so fairly easy to have 2 summons on the field. So with 3 BFA and 2 extra copies of Yuna, besides one that you may have in play, that's 5 copies of a card that says discard kill a guy, which is actually really good, especially yes, it's a 10k, or both of them are 10k damage plus, which will kill anything effectively, including Warrior of Light, or X-Death. Not that card is much of a threat to this deck. That's so many cards, and then on top of that, having Kusith as well, and then Une's effect, which you can add back Kusith, you just have so many ways to just go kill a guy, kill a guy, kill a guy, kill a guy. And so you don't need to do that proactively, but sometimes you do, but reactively, that's incredibly strong because there are so many things your opponent might do which rely on one of their forwards living, including try to kill you. But it's very, very, there's, once you have what you want in this deck, which isn't too hard to do either, but basically there are so many angles it can stop basically anything that your opponent intends to do, assuming it has the right cards, and it's not that hard to get the right cards. But I'll talk more about that in a second. Une, again, I do not need to explain this card, obviously. But what is particularly relevant here is that we do have access to haste. Now, if you're casting haste via Rydia, you've played Une, you've got a Rydia, they whatever their turn, maybe they try to kill your Une, whatever, you can haste the Une. So if you have your haste card, Ramu lets you switch it out for any summon in your break zone. Belius, even better, it's the same, but you draw a card as well. So it's actually just convert Belius into any other summon and also draw a card. The option to swap your haste card for a Titan means you can protect the Une as well. So you can use Une to protect herself during the turn that your opponent has to kill her before she's online. That part is very relevant, especially when there's stuff like Alexander, which can kill it, or anything that does like 9k. Now, obviously, if you have Una on top of that, even crazy. You just get extra free cards for whatever. And also, given all this, there's one thing I should mention. It's maybe pretty clear by now because I've mentioned it a lot. Always try to keep at least one Kusith available in your hand or break zone. So obviously, don't remove your only Kusith with Une. To reduce Une's cost, unless you absolutely have to. Now, as for the rest of the forwards, Auron, right? Last forward, Auron. He is the 50th card that I added. So I actually added this quite late, pretty much the night before. I was like, I need a 50th card in my deck. What am I going to add? And I was like, you know what? I've thought about Auron. I'll give it a shot. And I chucked in Auron. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's actually really, really sick. It's always going to get the draw because you're always going to have a summoner with it, effectively. It's really good EX insurance when you're going for game. So, at some point you do actually have to attack with some people and kill your opponent. You can't just sit there poking with Riku for the entire game. And Auron's very good at making sure that turn goes through without a hitch. He can actually block Zidane and even trades with it at 3 damage. And it lets Riku attack through her arch nemesis Ashe. So one annoying thing about Mono Water with this deck is that Ashe gets in the way of Riku because it's a 9k, so it can block the Riku. But if you bounce the Ashe itself, it's an EX and it will kill the Riku or something else. So Auron can actually let you use Riku to attack through an Ashe. Doesn't come that often. It's not ideal, but it's better than nothing. Yeah, main purpose, very good EX insurance, very good at protecting your stuff. And to put all this in perspective, you've got these 2 uber threats like Une and Riku. That they have to die immediately, basically. If you live with those in the field, then your opponent's going to lose. You've got 2 additional engine threats with Una and Rydia, and Una also provides a removal threat as well with Kusith when you've got BFAs or Unas lying around. And you've got instant speed ways to protect, recur, draw, and kill things. So basically every field in this deck is a nightmare to deal with, and you can rebuild them fairly easily. The only real bottleneck is access to Kusith, but that's easy enough to manage with Une and Garnet, as long as you're aware of it. And on top of that, you can ignore the X's, like I said, poke with Riku or go for game with Auron. And the mass amount of haste actually means you can create a kill threat pretty easily. So while the deck doesn't really have a strict board clear, it's got so many ways to recur BFA and Una that those are so cheap that you can basically just snipe down whatever you need. You can actually just kill someone this is one of those decks where as long as you're doing the stuff and making sure you keep your board control and set up your things the way you need to, you will end up just winning. Like you don't really need to sit there trying to figure out a time now I gotta do some weird stuff to get some stuff through. No, you usually just compile enough resources that you can basically now I can just kill this, I can do this, play this, give this haste, whatever. So and it'll kind of just present itself to you. That's kind of the core of the deck. As for the summons, so Kuchulain is just the next best cheap summon to cast really. So I've already talked about Kusith, most important, Belius and Ramu for the haste cards, Titan for the protection. Then Kuchulain is just the next one that's it's an EX, you cast with Rydia for free. It has a lot of applications currently, and you can also just use simply cantrip to destroy an extra card, and that's extra good with Una. Ramu 1 is just it's a way to kill monsters. That's the main thing. It's also a nice way to kill enemy Rydias or the Blanky Poroms. So that's just a nice option to have available. Hecaton and Mist Dragon are the only 2 non-free castable summons in here. They are just the main 2 options that have a specific use. They can kind of silver bullet certain things. So they're just good to have available as options with Une. So in terms of backups, this is very straightforward. Claris and Sarah, each of them can search the other element. So both of them are your Earth Water backup. So you just start with one of those, hard mull for one of those, start with one of those, you've got your Earth Water Sippy for the rest of the game. This deck plays very well off of 2 backups, assuming they're different colors. Also, make sure you remember that Sarah doesn't always have to get Princess Sarah. Sarah can actually get Kolka as well, which still gives you both colors, but then can also guarantee you get to like a Rydia or maybe an Une against certain decks or scenarios where an early Une is powerful. Then last backup, so Echo is obvious as well. It's an EX, such as your Rydia, Garnet, Una. Just a very good backup, obviously. And then Braska. So this is the 49th card, or it's actually I would say it's the 50th card now. I think Oron's been promoted. So it's not necessary. You don't have to play it, but it can generate a lot of value if you just randomly see it early. And in particular, excuse me. In particular, it turns your Una from odd to even, so you can efficiently cast her without spending backups, which is very good if you get it early and you can play Una a couple of times during a game. And also don't forget that Braska makes Echo cheaper too, so you can play Echo as a 2-cost backup if you have Braska out. Now, as for options in this deck, one option that is probably sensible, and I probably I wanted to try at some point again, I never got around to it, is a single category 4 forward, so that it actually is possible to turn on Hecaton or Mist Dragon if it comes up. Obviously, there's no pressure on you to actually do that, but I do think the one of the Porums is the best one for that. And actually, in this deck, this is one of the cases where I think the EX Porum would actually be fairly good, because you can actually kill it with Ramu while you're hasting your Une Yuriku. Because often what happens when you're using Ramu to haste your Une Yuriku, often the extra effect just disappears. There's not really anything useful to do with it. Maybe the most useful thing you can often do with it is kill your own Rydia so that you don't have 3 forwards, so they can't cast Shinryu cheaper. That does actually come up. Obviously, don't just be doing that for no reason. But yeah, that is semi-relevant. Also, sometimes you can snipe something they have, or dull something that's maybe going to block Riku. But yeah, often that 5k has nowhere to go, or the extra effect has nowhere to go, and so having a Porum on the field actually might be a nice way to use that extra 5k to get you a different summon back. But then obviously the Legend Porum is also very, very good and has a lot of applications too. Another card that I really want to try out, and I thought about probably too late and never got a chance to try, was Fairy. Now, I've tried this before, but I think in here in particular, it's obviously very good with Une, especially while you have Una out. So to put this into perspective, if you have a live Une on field and a Una on field, you can use a Une effect to get any summon back, Fairy it, well, you can even get the Fairy back, use Fairy on the Une, you draw a card with Una as well, Une gets active again. Basically, the result of that is that you draw 2 cards. Assuming you cast the Fairy with Rydia, if you don't, obviously, draw 1 card and cycle 1 card out. But yeah, that potential is actually quite solid. It's also, it would also be very good to mitigate Dull and Freeze, and that's especially good with Riku. So one of the ways that people can keep Riku down is to Dull and Freeze her. So Fairy can get around that. Also, people tend to freeze Une too, as you'd expect, and so being able to unfreeze Une is a good way to be able to get someone back where they don't expect it. There's also cute synergy with Titan. If you Titan your guy to block their stuff, and then they attack something else, and then you can activate the guy and then use that to block down. It can't die. Yeah, there's a lot of cool stuff that I think that cards could do, and it's also an EX, which is amazing. And then you could try a class 10th Moogle or even a class 4th Moogle, depending if you want to be able to maybe sometimes hard cast your fire or lightning cards. But I mean, I probably wouldn't. I think I'd lean more towards taking the Braska out entirely and not putting another backup in, or rather than I think if I was going to play 13th backup, it's probably going to be Braska. So, but there's options. Anyway, that's my 2 decks. I was very happy with how they both ran over the weekend. Thank you everyone for watching. Catch you later.